My husband introduced me to the most powerful man in the room by saying, "This is Marina. She stays home. Somebody has to." He laughed when he said it. Not cruelly, not even loudly. The kind of laugh a man gives when he thinks the joke is small enough that no one will remember it by dessert. The CEO did not laugh. He looked at me the way you look at someone you have been trying to find for 11 years. Then he set down his wine glass, walked around the table, and said the sentence that ended my marriage before the appetizers were even cleared. "Marina Voss. I would know that face anywhere. Daniel, do you have any idea who your wife actually is?" My husband blinked, still smiling, still certain the punchline belonged to him. He was wrong. It had never belonged to him. It belonged to me, and in the next 90 seconds he was finally going to find that out in front of everyone he had ever wanted to impress. The private dining room at the Marchetti Hotel smelled like truffle oil and old ambition. 12 people sat around a table set with more forks than any single meal required, waiting for a man named Adrian Cole to arrive. Adrian Cole ran Halcyon Dynamics, a logistics and supply chain company that had grown, in a little over a decade, from a garage operation into one of the fastest-moving private firms on the East Coast. My husband, Daniel, worked in business development for a mid-size freight brokerage that desperately wanted Halcyon as a client. This dinner was supposed to be the deal that finally made Daniel a partner at his firm, the deal he had been chasing for 18 months, the deal he had rehearsed in our bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning for 2 straight weeks. He had asked me to come because appearances mattered. A steady, well-dressed wife signaled stability to old-fashioned money, he said. He had picked out my dress himself, a modest navy thing that made me look, in his words, put together but not distracting. I wore it anyway. Not for him. For the version of the evening I already knew was coming, though even I did not know exactly how it would arrive. Daniel had spent the drive over reminding me of the rules. Smile but don't talk business. Laugh at Adrian Cole's jokes but don't try to be funny yourself. If anyone asks what I do, the answer was simple. Just tell them you're home with the kids, he said, checking his tie in the visor mirror. We don't have kids, I reminded him. You know what I mean, he said, already annoyed. Housewife. Homemaker. Whatever sounds normal. Normal. That word had been doing a lot of work in our marriage lately, always meaning smaller, always meaning quieter, always meaning me. I had learned over 9 years with Daniel that his ambition needed a stage, and the stage needed a supporting cast that stayed exactly where he placed them. I had spent most of those 9 years playing my part well. I did not tell him that the last check I had signed that week carried 7 zeros. I grew up in a house where money was never mentioned at the dinner table, and always mentioned in the walls. My father, Walter Voss, ran a small precision tool manufacturing shop outside Pittsburgh, the kind of business that survived because he refused to let a single machine sit idle for more than a day. My mother, Ruth, kept his books, his temper, and his 3 daughters in careful order, usually all at the same time. We were not poor. We were watchful. My mother had a phrase for every lesson she wanted to plant. A full pantry doesn't mean a fed family, she used to say, meaning it is not what you have, it's whether you know how to use it. She said it the first time she caught me giving away my allowance to a friend who never gave anything back. My father taught me to read a balance sheet before I could drive a car. He said numbers don't lie the way people do. They just wait patiently for you to notice the truth. I loved that patience. I studied finance at a state school 2 hours from home, worked 2 jobs to avoid loans, and graduated with a mind built for spreadsheets and a heart that still believed effort was rewarded fairly. At 26, I was working as a junior analyst at a regional investment firm, quietly building a small personal portfolio on the side using a strategy my father had taught me without ever calling it a strategy. By patient companies. By people who show up early and leave late. By conviction before it becomes obvious to everyone else. That was how I first heard about a 24-year-old founder named Adrian Cole. He was running a tiny freight matching startup out of a converted garage in Ohio, the kind of business most investors dismissed in the first 5 minutes of a pitch because it sounded boring. Trucks. Routes. Empty cargo space nobody wanted to fill efficiently. Adrian believed he could build software that solved it. Nobody serious was listening to him yet. I did not have millions. I had an inheritance from my grandmother, modest but real, sitting untouched in an account because I had nowhere urgent to put it. I read Adrian's business plan twice, checked his numbers 3 times, and then did something that would have terrified my younger self only a year earlier. I wired him $40,000 through a small holding company I quietly formed, under the name Voss Bridge Capital, and asked for nothing but quarterly updates and the right to advise, not control. Adrian never met me in person for the first 2 years. We spoke by phone, then email, then the occasional late-night call when a shipment fell through or an investor backed out. I helped him model his cash flow during his leanest quarter, the one where he nearly folded the company entirely. I told him patience compounds the same way my father used to tell me. He listened. Most young founders don't listen. Adrian did. By the time Daniel and I met, 3 years later at a mutual friend's engagement party, Voss Bridge Capital had grown its small position in Halcyon Dynamics into something worth paying very close attention to. I never mentioned it. Not because I was hiding something shameful, but because I had learned even then that the moment you tell certain men what you have built, they stop seeing you and start seeing your assets. Daniel was charming in the particular way men are charming when they have never once needed to be anything else. He worked in sales at the time, quick with a joke, quicker with a compliment, the kind of man who remembers your drink order after one conversation because it makes people feel chosen. I liked that he asked questions. I did not notice for a long time that he only ever wanted the short version of my answers. When he asked what I did for work, I told him I managed some investments. He laughed warmly and said, "That's cute. My mother dabbles in that too." I let it go. It was the first small door he closed on me, and I did not even notice the sound of the latch. We married 2 years later. I kept Voss Bridge Capital quiet, operating it through my own attorney and a small independent accountant, mostly because Daniel showed so little interest in the details of my work that explaining it felt like handing someone a gift they had already told you they didn't want. The shrinking happened slowly, the way most collapses do. Not an event. A pattern. In our first year, Daniel introduced me at a work party as my wife, she's in finance. By our 3rd year it became my wife, she does something with numbers. By our 6th year it was simply my wife. No description. No career. As though the fact of me had become sufficient, and the substance of me had quietly evaporated. He started making small jokes at dinners with his colleagues. Nothing dinner should have been allowed. "Marina keeps our house running so I can keep the lights on at the office," he'd say, and the table would laugh and I would smile because that was the role and I was by then very good at my role. I tried to tell him once how it felt. We were in the kitchen, and I had just finished restructuring a client's debt position that saved them almost $500,000 in interest over 5 years. I mentioned it lightly, hoping for a flicker of curiosity. "That's great, honey," Daniel said, not looking up from his phone. "Did you start the dishwasher?" I started the dishwasher. I also, quietly, moved another 6 figures into a logistics firm Adrian had just spun out of Halcyon, a smaller trucking analytics company that needed exactly the kind of patient money I specialized in providing. My mother had a saying for this too, though she never got the chance to say it about my own marriage before she passed. "Some men don't want a partner," she used to tell my sisters and me. "They want an audience that occasionally cooks." I understood, sitting in my kitchen with flour on my hands and a 9-figure portfolio I had built almost entirely without his knowledge, exactly what she meant. The dinner at the Marchetti Hotel was supposed to be routine. Daniel's firm, Corrigan Freight Partners, had spent over a year courting Halcyon Dynamics as a client, and this was billed as the final relationship-building dinner before contracts were signed. Daniel had not slept properly in 3 days. He kept rehearsing small talk in the bathroom mirror, testing which jokes might land with a man he had built up in his mind into something close to a god. "Adrian Cole doesn't do dinners like this often," he told me in the car, gripping the wheel a little too tightly. "If tonight goes well, I make partner by spring." I nodded, watching the city lights blur past the window, already knowing something Daniel didn't. Adrian Cole had called me 2 days earlier, his voice warm and a little amused, to ask if I had heard that his company was courting a freight brokerage called Corrigan. "Small world," he'd said. "One of their guys keeps mentioning his wife works in finance, but he can't seem to say what kind." I hadn't told Adrian who Daniel was married to. I hadn't needed to. Adrian had simply pulled the thread the way a good investor always does, and found me sitting at the other end of it, exactly where I'd been the whole time. At the table that night, Daniel was performing beautifully. He laughed at the right moments, refilled wine glasses at the right pace, dropped just enough humility into his pitch to seem trustworthy without seeming weak. I watched him work the room the way I imagine other wives watch their husbands play sports, half proud, half exhausted by how much effort masculinity apparently required. Then Adrian Cole walked in. He was taller than his photos suggested, dressed simply, the kind of quiet confidence that never needs to raise its voice in a room. He greeted the Corrigan executives warmly, shook hands down the table, and finally reached us. Daniel straightened like a soldier called to attention. "Adrian, so glad you could make it. This is my wife, Marina." He paused, just long enough to make sure the table was listening. "She stays home. Somebody has to." The laugh that followed was small, polite, forgettable to everyone at that table except me. Adrian did not laugh. He looked at me, tilted his head slightly, the exact way he used to on our very first video call 11 years earlier when he was trying to figure out whether the woman on the other end of a wire transfer was actually as sharp as her emails suggested. "Marina Voss," he said slowly, like he was confirming something he already suspected the moment Daniel said her name in the parking lot. "I would know that face anywhere." Daniel's smile faltered, confused. "You two know each other?" Adrian pulled out the chair beside me and sat down without waiting for an invitation, his eyes never leaving mine. "Daniel, do you have any idea who your wife actually is?" The table went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet when everyone senses a shift in gravity before they understand why. "She's my wife," Daniel said carefully, the word suddenly sounding less certain than it had 30 seconds earlier. "She's also the reason Halcyon Dynamics exists," Adrian said. "Voss Bridge Capital funded my company when I was 24 years old, and every serious investor in this city told me to give up. She's held a board advisory seat since our 3rd year. She restructured our debt during the year we nearly went under. I have made exactly one major decision in 11 years of running this company without consulting her first, and I regretted it within a month." Daniel's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "That's not possible. She stays home. She manages a portfolio worth more than every company at this table combined," Adrian said, his voice calm, almost gentle, as if he understood exactly how much damage that sentence would do and had decided Daniel deserved every ounce of it. "I didn't come here tonight for Corrigan Freight, Daniel. I came because my assistant mentioned your firm's rep kept talking about his wife in finance, and something about the way you described her made me want to see if it was who I thought it was." The silence at that table had weight. I could feel Daniel's colleagues recalculating everything they thought. They understood about the man across from them. "Marina," Adrian said, turning fully toward me now, ignoring the rest of the table entirely, "I owe you an apology. I should have told you I was meeting your husband before tonight. I didn't put it together until his assistant sent over his bio yesterday, and I saw his home address matched the one on our old wire confirmations." I set down my napkin, folding it carefully, buying myself one more second of quiet before I answered. "You don't owe me anything, Adrian," I said. "I think the apology belongs somewhere else at this table." Every head turned toward Daniel. He looked, for the first time in our 9 years together, genuinely small. Not humbled the way I had hoped he might one day become on his own. Cornered. There is a difference, and I had waited a long time to learn it. "Marina," he said, voice tight, "why didn't you tell me?" I looked at him for a long moment before answering, feeling something loosen in my chest that had been clenched for almost a decade. "I tried," I said quietly. "For years. You just never wanted the long version." Daniel's colleagues shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a senior partner named Griffith, cleared his throat and reached for his wine like it might explain something. Adrian, for his part, seemed entirely unbothered by the tension, as though he had simply been waiting 11 years for the chance to say the true version of my name out loud in front of someone who needed to hear it. "For the record," Adrian said, addressing the table now, "Corrigan Freight's proposal was solid. But I'll be honest, gentlemen, I came in tonight already planning to pass. Your numbers work, but your growth model relies on margins that won't survive the next fuel cost spike. And frankly, none of you asked the right questions about our warehousing bottlenecks in Ohio." He paused. "Marina asked me about those exact bottlenecks 2 years ago before I even knew they'd become a problem." Griffith's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. Daniel looked like a man watching his own eulogy being read by someone who genuinely respected the deceased more than he had ever managed to. I think, Adrian said, standing, buttoning his jacket with the unhurried calm of a man who had already gotten everything he came for. I'd actually like to have dinner again sometime, Marina, properly, without an audience this time. Corrigan, I'll have my office follow up. Thank you all for your time. He left a card on the table in front of me, not Daniel, then walked out with the same quiet confidence he'd walked in with, leaving 11 stunned executives and one husband slowly understanding that the woman he had spent a decade describing in fewer and fewer words had just been introduced to the entire table in one devastating, accurate sentence. The car ride home was silent for the first 10 minutes. Daniel gripped the wheel the way he had on the way there. Except now his knuckles were pale for an entirely different reason. How long, he finally said. Have you had that kind of money? Longer than we've been married, I said, looking out the window. And you never thought to mention it? Not once. Not when we were stressed about the mortgage in year 2. Not when I was working 60-hour weeks trying to make partner. I turned to look at him. I mentioned pieces of it constantly, Daniel. You called it cute. You told your mother I dabbled. You introduced me tonight as someone who stays home because somebody has to. I didn't hide my life from you. You just decided a long time ago which parts of me were worth hearing. He was quiet for a long stretch after that, the kind of quiet that comes from a man recalculating years of small cruelties he had never bothered to notice were cruelties at all. So what happens now? He asked eventually, his voice smaller than I had heard it in years. I think, I said. We both already know. The weeks that followed moved with the strange, brittle efficiency of endings that have been overdue for a long time. Daniel moved out within the month, staying first with his brother, then in a small apartment closer to his office, an office where, according to people who still spoke to me, his standing had shifted considerably after word of the Marchetti dinner made its way through the industry. Corrigan Freight's deal with Halcyon fell through entirely, and not quietly. Adrian made no secret of the reasons, not out of spite, he told me later, but because investors deserved honesty about why a partnership hadn't worked, and the honest answer involved a man who had, in front of witnesses, revealed he had no idea what his own house actually contained. Daniel called twice in the first month, apologetic in the specific performative way people are apologetic when they are more sorry about consequences than about causes. He said he had been threatened by my success. He said he wished I had made him feel more like an equal partner instead of quietly managing a secret empire beneath his nose. I told him gently but plainly that I had spent 9 years trying to be his equal partner, and he had spent 9 years assigning me a smaller and smaller role in a story that had always quietly been mostly mine. He did not call a third time. I did not mourn the marriage the way I once feared I would. I mourned, instead, the version of myself who had spent years shrinking her own accomplishments into bite-sized, non-threatening portions just to keep a dinner table comfortable. That woman deserved better than the years I gave her. Adrian and I did have that second dinner eventually, and several more after that, though never anything more than what it had always been, a genuine partnership built on mutual respect rather than mutual convenience. Under his encouragement, and with the confidence of finally being seen fully by someone who mattered, I stepped out from behind Voss Bridge Capital's quiet paperwork and became its public-facing principal for the first time in over a decade. Within 2 years, the firm had grown from a private holding vehicle into a boutique investment fund specializing in exactly the kind of overlooked, patient companies that had once been me. Trucking analytics startups. Manufacturing firms run by immigrant families the big banks wouldn't touch. Small logistics companies with brilliant and proven founders who reminded me every single time of a 24-year-old man in a garage in Ohio who had simply needed someone willing to listen past the first 5 boring minutes. I named the fund's flagship advisory program the Pantry Initiative, after my mother's old saying, a small nod to a woman who taught me that having something and knowing what to do with it were never the same lesson. 3 years after that dinner, I stood on a stage at an industry conference, invited to speak about patient capital and the invisible labor of building things quietly. I did not mention Daniel by name. I did not need to. Everyone in that industry already knew the story, the way stories like that always find their way around a room eventually. I told the audience about the years I spent being introduced as someone who stayed home because somebody had to, about the quiet accounts and the quarterly reports nobody at my own dinner table ever asked to see, about the particular loneliness of being brilliant beside someone who had decided long ago that your brilliance was inconvenient to his narrative. I told them what I wished someone had told me at 26. Your work does not require an audience to be real. Your value does not depend on someone else finally noticing it. Build quietly if you must, but never let quiet become the same thing as invisible. And never let someone else's comfort become the ceiling on your own ambition. I still keep my grandmother's old ledger book in my office, the one she used to track the tiny amounts of money she saved during years when women weren't even allowed their own bank accounts without a husband's signature. I keep it beside a framed photo of my father's workshop, the one with the sign above the door that read, "Simply patient work outlasts loud work." Some nights, closing out the quarterly reports for the funds that now carry my name openly instead of hiding behind a holding company, I think about that dinner table at the Marchetti Hotel. I think about the particular silence that fell after Adrian said my name, the silence of a room recalculating everything it thought it understood about a woman who had, for years, simply chosen not to correct them. I do not think about Daniel often anymore. When I do, it is without anger, mostly without anything at all, the way you think about weather from a trip you took a long time ago. He was not a villain in some dramatic cinematic sense. He was simply a man who mistook my quiet for smallness, my patience for absence, my choice to build without applause for evidence that there was nothing there worth applauding. If you are listening to this and you recognize even a small piece of yourself in that mistake, in being someone's supporting cast instead of someone's partner, in shrinking your accomplishments down to a size that fits comfortably into someone else's story, hear this clearly. You do not need permission to take up the space your work has already earned. You do not need someone else to announce your worth at a dinner table for it to be real. Keep your ledgers. Keep your quiet accounts. Keep building patiently, honestly on your own timeline, whether or not anyone at your table has bothered to ask the right questions yet. And if the day ever comes when someone finally sees the whole truth of what you built while they weren't paying attention, let them sit with that silence as long as they need to. You were never just anything. You were simply waiting for the right room to say your whole name out loud. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the quiet one at the table who was building far more than anyone around you realized, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of quiet strength and long overdue recognition, please like this video and subscribe for more stories just like it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.